Hey folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is 1:46 p.m. Central Texas time, and it is that time again, Stephen Friday. You know, we usually start this at 11, but I had a big challenge, and I want to read you this verse. This is James 1, 2 through 3. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Boy, that couldn't be more true for me, and I'm sure for you as well. And so I decided, in the face of all of that, that I would be disciplined to do our Right Side Up. And what's amazing about it is the topic today is going to speak directly into all of this. I hope you are doing very, very well. I'm glad that you joined again. And you know what? How do you knock down the biggest and tallest of trees? Well, you take a chop. And so today we're chopping wood. And I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate for those that have prayed for me earlier today, facing trials, troubles of many kinds. I'm sure you are as well. And I think the greatest thing about what we can do for each other is to be encouraging and supportive, right? I got some really cool stuff to share with you today. Some amazing things happened this week. And I'll share with those after we visit with our friend Steve Staggs. Empty Corner, what's up? Taryn, thanks for being here. Sam Kemp, thanks for being here. And hello, looking good out there. Let's go. Let's go. All right, let's jump into this because I'm excited. I need to hear a little reminder myself. So check this out. Talked about the idea of being proactive. You're either reacting or you're being proactive. What's amazing about this, process? And I think it's really interesting because I've heard you say this so many times. You're like, hey, well, how do you see this? Right. And that's an interesting one. We talk about, Jesus is alive and he speaks, but you often will say, how do you see this? And of course, that's, in a way, a strategic use of this relationship. You're saying, okay, I'm going to do this with him. He's made it very clear to you that this is designed as a partnership.
Yeah.
And he wants to be our partner. And what I love about what you're saying is you go, look at it for what it is, right? We don't react. And I think one of the things I took away from one of our other visits was there are no more oh no's.
Yeah.
This idea that I'm not going to react to these things as if my hair's on fire anymore. But what you've said here is, as this Elohim man, right? As this man who is made in the image of God, you're saying, all right, and of course it goes right back. I mean, the scriptures talk about this so much. Is like, without me, you can do nothing. But the implication is that with me, you can do just about anything. And this activation of who I've made you to be is made complete in our partnership.
Yeah.
And I think what's so cool about this is, it's one thing to just try him on for size, right? That's kind of the simple thing. Like, hey, Jesus, you there? Like, what's up? But then there's this other thing that says, I think it's a very, very practical, repeatable question. How do you see this?
Yeah.
This is a problem that is really causing me some heartburn. And, I know that just reacting to this is only going to put you more into a mess and be more overwhelmed or more buried. And, you use this physical example of the house full of stuff. And of course, it's daunting, right?
Yeah.
In the natural, it's very daunting. But you're right. I had a buddy in business who said to me, the project fits the time allotted. And I love that because it was so true. Because if you allot a bunch of time, people waste their time.
Yeah.
But you have a narrow amount of time, you kind of, stuff does what you tell it to do. But that's so true. And I think that, it changes your very kind of relationship to, like, when you're willing to ask that question, hey, how do you see this? There's a lot packed in that question.
Yeah.
Because you're acknowledging that, hey, you obviously see this differently than I do. And wow, I mean, and here you are basically testifying the fact that you've practiced this for a long time and you haven't run into a problem that's insurmountable. That's pretty amazing.
Well, that is exactly right, Matt. And there's this verse that we quote all the time, and as kids we were kind of having a lot of fun. There is nothing impossible for God. You remember this we talked a few weeks ago about the what we call the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and said, what must I do to be saved? And that whole thing. And then later on, Peter says, well, who can be saved?
Yeah.
And that whole thing. And then Jesus, was responding to him that there is, what is impossible for men is possible with God. For all things are possible with him. Yeah. Well, what we do is we take that, and then as kids we say, well, can he make a rock he can't lift?
Yeah.
That kind of a thing. because we take the nothing impossible, and this is going to, here's another one of those examples where the translators misdirect us. The words no thing, the word translated thing is the word rhema. So what Jesus is saying is nothing that God speaks is impossible for him. Not the fact that, hey, everything, is of the nut. No, that's not what he's saying. God is only obligated, if we could use that word, obligated to fulfill what he decrees.
Yeah.
Okay? So whatever he decrees, whatever he declares, whatever he commands, whatever he instructs, whatever he reveals, it's not impossible for him. It's very possible. In fact, it is by its very nature will be done exactly the way he describes it.
Yeah.
Because when he speaks it, he then produces all that is necessary to accomplish whatever it is that he's speaking. So when you say, okay, Jesus, what do you see in this? There's this interesting dynamic that I can repeat what I hear, but I cannot describe what I do not see. And so I can repeat things that I have no comprehension of.
Yeah.
And I can probably sound pretty smart about stuff that I've heard and regurgitated that I have no idea what the heck that's about. But I cannot describe what I cannot see. So, Jesus, you see things in a particular way. If you describe them to me, just because I can regurgitate that doesn't mean I actually understand what it is that we're dealing with. So how are you seeing this? Because when you see it, see, the eyes create a context for the rest of the body to act. Ears don't do that. See, my hearing doesn't create the context for the body to act. The hearing is what attracts and informs our thinking and our feeling. But what we see creates the context for our body to react, to act in accordance with what we see in real terms. So guess what? If I have an issue that I have to deal with, my body has to be mobilized to do that. Hearing can give me some comprehension of what the issue is, but I've got to see it in order to know how the body needs to be mobilized to deal with the issue. So it's really important. And we're not often taught about that, but it's seeing and hearing. It's not either or.
Wow. Well, it just connected for me.
What's that?
Was looking up at high places versus looking down with Jesus.
There you go.
And for those of you who don't know what I'm referencing, we had Steve come to the Gen Con conference, and he shared with us, and boy, you could hear a pin drop when you were talking to everybody. Was just like, everyone was affixed. But what you just said really, emphasized for me, I'm constantly looking up at these problems, right? And I'm looking up at these things that they're bigger, they're taller, they're higher than I am. And it's interesting. I just kind of imagine sitting next to you, right? Let's say, let's just make it real practical. You and I are sitting at a baseball game, right? I never played professional baseball. And I can imagine me leaning over to you and going, hey, Steve, what's going on there? And you going, all right, let me tell you what's really going on there. And it would be that way for us, right?
Yeah.
I don't have the experience that you've got. I'm saying, hey, what just happened there? You're like, let me tell you what's really happening there, because I know what's happened. And it's very, very practical to what you said about what does it mean to, hey, how do you see this? And I think what's really cool is the visual that I get is if I'm seated with him in with Jesus, and he's not in the high place, he is above it all.
Yes.
Then I'm going to get the right perspective, because I've seated myself in the right position versus looking up. I'm with him looking down and getting his view of it. And I think it's really interesting, the language you're splitting here.
Yeah.
Is this, how do you see it?
Yeah.
Is very specific. And it almost, by asking that question, forces you to sit next to him and go, hey, Steve, what are they doing there? You're like, oh, let me tell you, this is, when he goes out to the mound, he's not just trying to make him feel bad. No, this is what's really going on. Yeah. And I wouldn't know that if I wasn't willing to sit next to you and go, hey, what's going on there? How do you see this, Steve? It's really cool. It's really cool.
That is exactly right. I can tell you all day long how to hit a curveball, but if you can't see one, what good does it do? Because your mind, through hearing, is going to create an imaginary picture of what that looks like, and it's going to draw on what your experience is. So if you hear something, you're going to imagine something that then is built on the experience that you have. But when you see something, if it's brand new, it's very, very different. I mean, I could share a lot of examples about that, but it is so profoundly practical. It has nothing to do with, with here's one of the differences, Matt, and it speaks to this very issue. One of the things that happens inside the church is we are taught that it's okay to be academics. So what we do is spend an enormous amount of time studying the Bible, studying the history, studying the words, doing all of these things, all of which is incredibly valuable. We are taught there is almost no time spent in how you live this in an everyday manner.
Oh yeah.
And guess what? What ends up happening, what we hear and read, if we don't have the experience that comes from actually seeing the dynamic of what's in play, we create imaginary ideas about what those words and concepts mean. And they're imaginary. And we declare them to be true.
Wow.
And they're not true because we have no experience in dealing with them. Name one other place in life where we say it's good enough to just study a topic and tell your goo-goo without experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. Experience informs what you see and hear.
Taste and see that the Lord is good.
There you go. And by the way, you just experienced that when you referred back to the high places.
I got another one for you.
Go, man.
You said, okay, so now here we are, the Mount of Transfiguration. Why did Jesus think that Peter and James and John needed to see that experience? And I think what's really interesting about it is here they go up, they see Moses and Elijah, and they see Jesus conferring with him, and they think they know what's going on.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about it is they're like, well, do we need to build you like some tents and some, I'll build you these things. And how amazing is this? Is that in that experience to say, you need to see this. And it wasn't all 12, right? It was the 3 dudes. And it's like, you need to see this. And of course, we know Thomas, like, I need to feel it. I need to actually get in there. But that he was willing to say, okay, there's going to be this time. But even in the midst of you seeing it, there's a voice that's going to come and say, I'm going to give you actually my perspective.
Yeah.
And what's so incredible about the transfiguration that we've talked about, and I think it's so important to mention when we're talking about that story, is the disciples, Peter, James, and John, saw this as equal things. They're like, well, we got Jesus and we've got Moses and Elijah. We got the law and the prophets. Everybody's here. It's a party. And the voice comes and says, this is my son. And it's interesting how even today we want to equate these things as equal. Yeah. And of course, that was this voice from above that says, this is my son, listen to him, which to me says these things are not equal.
Right.
That this is not, you've taken the law and the prophets, and there's so much packed in there. But what were they talking about? And the implications of the fact that they are still talking with Jesus.
Yes.
Because they are alive. Because Jesus is not the Lord of the dead. He's the Lord of the living. And how interesting that that's actually this perspective. Like, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to correct you in the process of showing you to have the right perspective of who I am. And that's just so powerful. And but it's so obvious too. It's like real common sense too, that you're like, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like teaching my daughter who's going through, driver's education. It's like, well, let's just study a book. Let's never drive a car. Well, you're in for a world if you start driving without some practice.
It's a different experience, right?
Yeah.
One is knowing about, and the other is knowing by personal experience.
Yeah.
And by the way, those words are used commonly in the New Testament. And they are used differently, even though we use the same English word, either to know or to understand. They're very different words, oida and ginosko. One is a knowing by observation, another is knowing by firsthand personal experience. And when you listen to what Jesus is sharing and then observe how he deals with you when he shows you stuff, he's always bringing you into the experience of what you have just learned.
Yeah.
In our experience, and with Carter and others that that we talked with, we have the 24 to 48 hour rule.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens within 24 seconds or 24 minutes. But the point is that when Jesus is ready to show you something, he'll tell you about it. And then within a very, very short period of time, you'll find yourself right smack in the middle of the very experience that you just were told, that he told you about.
Yeah.
And it happens, well, if Carter were on here, Carter would be telling you it's probably happened several hundred times.
Yeah.
You yourself, talk about how many times it's happened to you. The point is, it's not a by accident, coincidental thing. It happens so frequently that you eventually start saying, okay, wow, the Lord just showed us something here. And you start anticipating the experience because you know it's coming.
Yeah. Well, and the it also is reflective in a very practical sense about how we see the most effective way in education, for
Yeah.
example. And we, you think about, there's the philosophical, right? There's kind of the liberal arts, if you will, but you don't want your surgeon working on you without some practice, right? And I think about these things that we would say, there's a lot of new, well, I know there's a lot of study around, okay, experiential learning and multidisciplinary stuff, because a lot of times when things are isolated, you're like, my son's like, why do I need to know this math, Dad? And I'm like, yeah, well, just trust me, it's going to be helpful. But then when he's really excited because they're going to build a weather balloon that takes a camera up and, goes really, really, really high up, and they have to determine trajectories and all this. And he's like, yeah, it's so cool. But yeah, he did all this math in the process of working on this project to do this, to see the practical application of it. And in a way, it's kind of this framework of how things work, right? How do we learn? But you're making a really good point. I think it's the disappointment that I've had as someone who came to the church as an adult. I was introduced as a kid, and to me, it was just a thing to do. And it wasn't until I didn't get really steeped in the whole Christianity lingo stuff until I was 28.
Hmm.
And of course, I had to kind of, assimilate just to fit in. But I've always been frustrated by the fact that there's a lot of emphasis on acquisition, right? There's a lot of acquisition, but there's not a lot of this cultivation of the practice.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of, I think that there's Bible studies and reflection and, some of the, what people would call the spiritual disciplines. But I would say for the majority of people, it's entertainment, and it's not, and because it lacks practical application, it seems tired at best.
Well, Matt, let's go back to where we started with, looking at the planet and are we happy? How in the world are we going to contribute to the solution to what we see are massive problems in the world if we're not willing to practice how to solve the problems in our own life?
Yeah.
It's very fundamental and basic. If we can use the overused word, it's so flippin' practical, it blows your brains out how practical it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, okay, so what if we have all the solutions with what's going on with Israel and Hamas and Iran and all of that stuff? So is that something that's going to change, or have we just created a bridge to the next powder cake?
Yeah.
What are we doing? I don't know about you, but when I solve a problem, I don't want to have to mess with it again.
Yeah.
I just want to solve the thing. And whatever it is that gave entry for that problem to occur, I want to learn how to be bigger than that problem so I don't invite it back into my house.
Yeah.
No, you had your turn. Thank you for your instruction. Now exit the premises and do it now. And then, oh, by the way, it does it. Why is it doing that? Oh, because you're part of the Elohim class. What does the Elohim class do? It's the ruling class. Everybody knows it in creation but you.
Yeah. You
Learn
forgot
it.
who you are.
Learn it.
So let me,
glad you did.
I'm going to throw a knuckleball at you this time.
Okay.
You ready? No, this is, yeah, get
wood.
ready. It's going to have some Magnus effect on it. So I got a buddy, a close friend, who lives in the town in Maine where 18 people got killed yesterday or the day before.
Yeah.
He's the manhunt. He's still on the loose. Mentally ill guy shot up a bowling alley and a bar and grill, injured, I don't know, maybe 80. And I mean, it's crazy. Like, but killed, I think 18 or 22. And I talked to him. He's like, yeah, we're like on alert. They've shown where he's been. He drove by my house, like directly out front. So he's that close to it. And he knows some of these people that were killed. And one of the guys that was killed is, he's like this really sweet man who does sign language services. He's somebody that, I guess he's really well known, and he does the sign language stuff for, I guess, important people, and is a well-known person, but I guess a really wonderful person. Okay. And of course, this is tragic. But so also is children being decapitated by Hamas.
Yeah.
And I think about, this, there's some kind of standard things. We're like, hey, what kind of problems you got? Well, that's an interesting problem. besides the fact that you're fearful in your home, but also that your loved one, indiscriminately has been shot and killed. That's a problem, Steve.
Yeah.
Now, I tend to look at this and try to back out, right? And I think that I'm doing the right thing when I back out. I even look into the scriptures and I think about some of these scenarios like Korah's rebellion, where 250 of the leaders of Israel basically said to Moses and Aaron, "You guys are lording this thing over me." And they're like, "Well, why don't you show up tomorrow morning with your censers full and we'll see what the Lord says." And he liquefied them. The fire came out of the altar and literally they were turned to dust. They hammered out their censers on these were the leaders of Israel, right? Then there was like a plague. The earth swallowed people.
Mhm.
Bridge that for me. Bridge that problem for me. Because on one hand, I look at it and I say, you know what? The fact that I am sad and that I'm, bummed that anyone that I love would have passed, so suddenly, I have to remind myself that what I think is life is not life. That's the only way I can kind of be okay with it, is that, all right, I'm holding on to something here that clearly is eternal, that I don't see as eternal. I see as temporary, but I'm still upset about it. How does that problem fit into this construct, right? I can understand, well, if I'm a nicer person, or if I'm if I make some better decisions in my life, if I, and some of those are really consequential and some of those aren't as consequential. Like maybe I should be nicer to my wife and actually listen to her. Maybe I should stop being so damn selfish and maybe sit with her for a bit and maybe understand what the heck's going on with her.
Yeah.
That's not like jump in front of a bullet. Bridge those for me. Help me understand how to relate to those type of problems, because they seem like they're in a different category.
Yeah,
It's my best knuckleball.
yeah, it's a good one. We have been trained with this idea that devices are what change the world. So if we have the right kind of law, which is a device, if we have the right kind of technology, that's a device. If we have the right kind of tools, education, things like that, those are devices. If we have the right kinds of things, devices, then we can change the world. We can rid ourselves of all of this stuff. But as we've talked about before, devices are neutral. They have no animating capability of their own. Even AI has to be animated by one who has a life force in it, which are human beings. You remove the human and the device will be rendered inoperable. What changes the world is not a device, a thing, a law, the absence of something or the addition of something. What changes the world is nature and character. You change the nature and character of the animating force and you change the use of the device, which changes the outcome that the device produces in concert with the animating force. So nature and character is what changes the world. Now, let's go back to what we were talking about before. You made a statement earlier on about the purity of the intimacy of a relationship does not just happen, it's cultivated. Well, what is it that you are cultivating? That happens to be an agricultural term.
Yep.
You are planting seeds. Those seeds are what? They are decisions. Those decisions are then what? Nurtured. And what are they nurtured in? So the decision is made. It is the produce of a nature and character. And all the devices around it are designed to help facilitate that cultivation of that seed to bear its fruit, but it will bear after its own kind. So if what is cultivated is a domination from a nature and character that's designed to dominate, guess what you're going to cultivate and then produce? Domination. Is that domination then going to add to this unique, perfect union that you were talking about? No. What is it going to do? Exactly the opposite. So what is it that produces that unique, perfect union? It is a nature and character that considers the other party is more valuable than themselves. And if both parties will do that, then guess what? One is more valuable to the other and the other is more valuable to that person. And guess what you have? The elevation of value of both parties toward one another. And you have a perfect union. That's nature and character. So what happened with the with Moses and Korah. That was a nature and character issue. It wasn't about the decision making. It wasn't about the leadership. It was about the nature and character in the leadership.
Yeah.
See what's happening with this young man. Okay, there is a nature and character that's in operation, and it is to kill. If you've ever been around a spirit of murder, man, that dude is nasty. The Lord took us to Arlington, Texas many years ago, and we found this townhouse in a brand new addition that was built. We actually ended up meeting some really great people who became some really great friends of ours who happened to move in about the same time across the street. Beautiful addition, absolutely gorgeous. We were driving into the addition one day, and it was like something just punched us. It was like this descending, I don't even know how to describe it other than a sensation, a feeling that was so vile, thick, and heavy. It was like, whoa, what the heck did we just drive into?
Hmm.
And I grew up in Southern California with really heavy fog, and it was like that on steroids. And we drove in, got into the house. There was just this, human language, English language is not even able to describe what I felt and experienced. Try to get out of the sun here a minute. And so we came in the house, my little kid, my kids were like 6 and 8 years old. My beautiful little wife, we were just, what is going on? Come to find out the next day that somebody had killed 3 teenagers 2 doors down from us and stuffed them, one behind, one in a washing machine. Now think about this. To stuff a teenager into a dryer, one into a washing machine, and one behind the washer and dryer. And it was palpable. Well, guess what? There was a spirit, there was a nature and character at work that thirsted for blood. Not just any blood, but the blood of the innocent. Well, guess what? That's not about devices. That's about nature and character. So if you want to change the world, change the nature and character, beginning with my nature and character. Right? That to me is what is the bridge to it all.
It is. It is. And that's so strong, Steve. And it's so helpful. I think a lot of people, you think those that are apologists, right, hear that classic religious question all the time. Why does God let bad things happen to good people? And you just actually, I think, answered it for the first time that I've ever heard it answered. That's satisfactory to me. It's like, and you think at the root cause of this, how, and I'm just reflecting to you how powerful this idea is what is my nature and character, right? And what's so neat about this is now when I think about the scriptures and I think about the stories of the prodigal son, I'm just so blown away because it's the picture of everything in one story. It's like this is the life right here, that we would go our own way and want to have our thing. And the one who loves us says, okay, you can have it because you have free will to make choices on your own, son. And you go off and you go your own way. And what does it end up doing, right? Its nature and character is yours. And what is your nature and character? Get mine at all costs. Go out there and live this raucous life. And what ends up happening is it produces the fruit that it produces.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's from episode 27. I'd encourage you, there's a link in there to take a look at it. There's so much more in 37 episodes, 2 hours apiece with Steve Staggs. For those who have ears to hear, when you think about this kind of wisdom, Steve spent his entire life, well, the first part of it, applying discipline to the game of baseball. He was driven, like from a very, very young age. All he could think about was baseball, right? And the Lord gave him that, right? He gave him that interest, gave him that capability, gave him that facility to do. And what ended up happening was that commitment over time and that desire over time made him a professional baseball player. And I literally pulled, my buddy Ray gave me this. I always wanted a baseball card of Steve, and he blew up, this is Ray, blew up this picture, and he bought a Steve Staggs baseball card for me. And what I'm going to share with you in the second half here is really what made me pull that out and put it right on my desk and look at it. And I want to share that with you in a second. But a couple notes from what Steve shared that are significant. Devices don't change the world. Nature and character changes the world. I never understood this when I first met Steve and we started talking for like 8 months privately. I didn't understand what he was doing. When I first met him, he said, "I'm called to the men of the transfer," and I was like, "Oh, transfer? That means we're going to make money." And of course, in this kind of crypto world, and what I came to understand is that, and I swear to you, when I met Steve and shook his hand, like the Lord said to me, listen to him. I said, "Is he an angel?" And what is an angel's role but to be a messenger? And of course, we know as Elohim man is someone that is a grafted in, that is a son, right? That we are made in the image of God. It impressed upon me something really significant, and that is the discipline that Steve showed towards baseball. He literally, over the probably what 1982 to 1984, something like that, basically left it and said, "You know what? I'm going to apply this same discipline to seeking how you see it." And you think about the immense amount of wisdom that was given to Steve, and then his desire. I'm going to tell you something. Steve had the most patience of anyone I ever met in my entire life. Well, what is that nature and character, and where does it come from? And he was saying in that clip there that what a perfect union it is when, let's say, a husband and a wife see the other person as more valuable than themselves. Right? It's one thing that you're in a relationship and you've got somebody that's fawning over you, right? Think about the narcissist and the woman that is like, "Oh, you can do no wrong, oh, you're the best." It's one way, and it doesn't work. And then imagine those people that you've seen them, right? There is this radiating love because it comes from a mutual submission and understanding and consideration for the other party as more valuable than themselves. You think about, what is that? What is that? Well, it is a multiplication factor. It's not addition. It's not 1 plus 1 equals 2. But that's also true in all relationships. And here is Steve putting aside all of this great knowledge. He could have boasted about, "Look at what I've got." He could have monetized it. He could have written books. He could have done so many things, but he was faithful to the men of the transfer. And I'm so thankful that he spent, 8 months privately and then over a year publicly sharing these things, because, you know, you got to be interested or this stuff is irrelevant. I'm sure there's people watching or will watch this and they're like, "Oh, you said the name of Jesus, I'm out." And what's interesting about this whole thing, and the reason that, I had this difficulty this morning and I was like, "Well, I guess I'm not going to be able to do right side up." And I'm like, "No, I'm doing this." And then I listen to that and it just speaks directly into my soul. And I go, we are under the impression that we're alone. We're under the impression that there's not a purpose. We're under the impression, and even those of us who know fall into that trap so often, of the fact that, well, there's stuff to do. But think about this. I told that story. That was story of the guy that killed all those people up in Maine. We're looking at devices. We're looking at the blockchain, right? And I'm going to take this in the practical sense right to where we are in crypto. We're looking at, a layer one. We're looking at immutable contracts. We're looking at self custody. We're looking at trustless yield. And we're saying, look at these devices. These are going to change the world. But in reality, devices don't change the world. Look at AI. It's not the devices, it's the animating force, the life force that animates us. And you think about that, it's so true. You know, we jokingly talk about how a hammer can be used to, hang a picture in your house or build something, but it can also be used to kill someone. And it's the animating force that, the gun or the hammer doesn't get up off the table and hit people on its own. And so when you think about what is your nature and character, I dealt with a situation this morning that, like, literally, shot my wheels off completely. I mean, it was all I could see was red, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Just one of these things where it's just like, I cannot believe this. And I said at the beginning of that clip, I said, there are no more oh no's. I don't want to live with my hair on fire. And there's so many of us that sometimes that's our reaction, or we're married to or around people that everything is like at 11. And what's amazing about Steve is nothing was ever at 11. Actually, it's funny. Went to the memorial service, and a lot of people made that point. They're like, "This guy doesn't have a panic button, even to the point where he's having a heart attack. He's not panicking about anything." Where does that come from? And of course, the Bible talks about there's a peace that transcends all understanding, and that's what Steve had. And I've experienced it. You probably experienced it too. It's like, hold on, we're not alone. And what's amazing about this life that is so short is that there is purpose. And that gets me to really a point I want to share with you. I don't often make recommendations. I'm going to make a recommendation for you. Something is happening in this world that's amazing. And I want to point something out to you that you have to, if you're interested, you have to see. This is Pastor John Burke, and he is on this podcast with Sean Ryan. And I believe Sean Ryan is a former Navy SEAL, and he's a very popular podcaster, but he has John Burke on. And John Burke, he led a church in Austin, Texas for 20 some odd years. And he is the man who wrote the book, Imagining Heaven. And then he had a subsequent follow-up book called Imagining the God of Heaven. And what he did, and I want you to hear from him. I'm not going to do much on this. I'm just doing this really to promote that you would watch this. It's a 4-hour podcast. You put it on like 2x and you can still understand it. I did that yesterday and it just blew my mind in a wonderful way. And for those of you that find this of any value at all, I think you'll find that valuable. But I want you to hear something. This is about how John Burke came to this as an atheist engineer, how he came to this topic that basically his life work is based on. And that is 1,500 interviews with people who have had near-death experiences and leading a church for 20 some odd years. So take a listen to this.
Because it would defy everything we know.
Apart from analogy. But what is fascinating, so you talked about evidence. There's evidence, lots of evidence. So, for me, I started into all this as an agnostic and a skeptic. Like we talked about, we both had some church background, but it was very formal, ritualistic. And I was just like, how do you know this stuff is real? Like, how do you know there's a God? Jesus, the Son of God. I mean, legend. Come on, that. And I had lots of questions. Like I said, engineer, skeptic. That was the way my brain's always worked. And when people didn't seem to care or want to address my questions or have answers, I was just like, I'm done with this. Well, my dad was dying of cancer, and someone gave him the very first research on near-death experiences. And I saw it by his bedside table. And I started thumbing through it, and I couldn't stop reading it. I read it in one night. And at the end of it, I was like, oh my gosh, like this might be evidence, like actual evidence. This whole afterlife, God, Jesus stuff is real because of how many people were talking about it. So that didn't change my mind. It just opened me up. And I started exploring. So kind of like you, there was just a group of people meeting in a home, and they were reading and talking about the Bible, and I got invited into it. And because of that, I was like, all right. I told them, I said, you're not going to want me there because I've got a lot of questions. And they're like, no, bring it. And so that's actually where I came to faith in Christ. And, and then later I went from a career in engineering into becoming a pastor, really to help people like me, skeptics. Because I found that not many churches made space for people to doubt and wonder and process. And I found that there are real answers. There's a ton of evidence. Like right now, it would take more faith for me not to believe than to believe because of the evidence.
Really?
Yeah.
Would you say the majority of the evidence that that brought you here is from near-death experiences?
No. I mean, those are huge. And, it was what?
Finbear, thank you very much for your recommendation on the buffering. So I just want to, I'm trying to emphasize that you really need to listen to this. Pastor Scott Jankowski reached out to me and he told me about this. And of course, when you've lost your dad and then, Steve and all these things and you're processing all that stuff, he said, hey, this might be interesting to you. Here's some of the things that just hit me so hard yesterday that I wanted to share with you that come from this podcast. John Burke has done interviews with 1,500 people over the last 20 years on near-death experiences. And like he said, he was an atheist engineer. He was working in Southern California. And this happened to be where there was research being done. He had read some of the early research. And what's interesting is he talks about the fact that, our technologies have gotten so good that we can resuscitate people a lot better than we used to. And so the capabilities of the medical industry has enabled us to be able to, do a lot of different things with drugs and, shocking people and doing all these things that kind of bring them back. But it's the commonalities between these 1,500 that will absolutely blow your mind. And what's amazing is it is across culture. It's across age group. It's across all these things. And these things are common. And what's amazing about them is the provision that is for us. And so if you're somebody that is fearing death, somebody that's scared, right? You feel alone, you feel weak, you feel sick, you feel, anxiety over these things. I would listen to this and I was reminded of a story that I've shared previously, but I got married and we probably 6 months later, here we are about, we're going to have a baby. And it was after we got married, if you're asking. And I'm with my father-in-law painting my daughter to be's room. And he is a good, Texas man who doesn't talk a whole lot. And we're both up on ladders doing the edging. And he doesn't talk much. And he says, hey, Matt, Nanny almost died yesterday. And Nanny was his mother. And I was like, okay, this guy doesn't talk a whole lot. And here he is talking to me about this. I'm like, all right, well, what's up? What happened? He said, well, my sister was there in the hospital room and something happened. I guess, some sort of levels dropped really significantly and alarms were going off. And she started saying, they're calling my name. They're calling my name. They're calling my name. And she thought this was really strange. Well, they rushed into the room and got her levels back together, potassium or something like that, sodium. And she lived for another 2 weeks. And what's amazing is he was like, don't you think that's really interesting? And so, for the years after that process, I was like, how crazy is that? They know there's more than one and they know your name. Well, I run into, this podcast. And this is like one of the most common things between all 1,500. And these aren't like Christian people. This is just people who have had near-death experiences that he's interviewed. And they basically say, pretty much all of them, and you can listen to it for yourself and you can read the books, is basically what happens is these people will die, right? Brain dead, no breathing, and no heart rate. And they find themselves above themselves in this room. And we've heard that, it's kind of a classic story, right? Oh, my soul leaves my body and I'm above it. And they end up having, as if they had senses, 5 senses or 6 senses, they have like 50. And when they come back, they talk about this, that they saw everything clearly, like everything. There wasn't like a need to focus on anything. You saw everything. And what's amazing about it is all of these stories are of people who are talking when they come back. They're literally talking about all the things that happened when they were basically dead, at least what we would count as dead. And amazing stories about who was there, what happened, what the process was and everything. And one of the funny stories was a guy who they were trying to resuscitate and they went to put in intubate him, right? And he had dentures and he took out his dentures and the nurse put the dentures in a drawer next to the bed in the ER or whatever in the room. on, I guess, a cart that had all the bottles on it. And so this guy was toast, right? No pulse, nothing. And they were doing all these things for him, and they finally resuscitated him, but he was in a coma. And he was in a coma for another week. Okay. So he didn't just like come out of it and be like, hey guys, let me tell you what's up. So a week later, he comes out of this and he recognizes that he doesn't have his dentures, and he looks over, and the nurse that he remembers took them out of his mouth. He says, oh, you know where my dentures are? And they're in the table beside the bed, not his bed that he was at. And of course, John Burke, who's done these interviews, when he started doing this research and talking about this stuff, doctors would say, that's not possible. I've been a doctor for 40 years, and I've been a cardiologist, and I've dealt with people who have gone through these things, and they've never reported this to me. And so they basically, a number of doctors set out to disprove what John Burke was saying, that he was lying about these near-death experiences. And come to find out, they started doing research with their own patients, and they found that these same things were true, but people felt embarrassed to talk about them because they were like, well, I don't want anyone to think I'm crazy, that I literally had this experience. Well, he goes into tremendous detail, and I really encourage you to watch it, because if you're interested in these things, it's so comforting. Because basically what people are saying is, you have this experience and literally you're overwhelmed with this sense of protection and love. And then generally there's a light, and that light leads you somewhere. And for the majority of people, you're greeted by, and there's a variety of things, people that who have passed, and also angels and all sorts of things. But the environment and everything is really interesting that they talk about. But they literally talk about this overwhelming light that is essentially embedded with love and protection and all these things. And there's almost an ushering in. And it's really, really fascinating. He talks about the protective nature of that light and everything. I'm not going to give away the punchline to all those things, because you really have to experience this yourself. But, I had that experience with my father-in-law, and, you don't hear those stories. Yeah, they're calling my name. They're calling my name. When you hear this story, you don't get this by going to church and learning about the Bible. But even though John talks about biblical references that actually point to this very thing, but these are real people's experiences, and they're not Christian people. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things. Is there was one Hindu guy that he talked to, and what's amazing is that regardless of people's cultural background and regardless of their religious experience, they're seeing the same things. And what's interesting is that they're seeing essentially a place where people are alive. And and I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail, because you just have to experience it yourself. But what's so encouraging to me is there's a doctor, a woman who had her own near-death experience, where she was in a kayak that went over these falls, and she literally got destroyed, and it basically killed her. And she found herself outside of this experience. Meanwhile, all of her friends are trying to get her out of this situation. And she has this experience, and she goes to this light and is welcomed in all of these things. And the things that she is told and understands, and then, being a doctor, comes back and talks about these things, it should be so encouraging to you. And the things that she has outlined, I think she wrote a book as well, that it's exactly what Steve told me. And it's really bizarre. God has a plan, and that plan he will accomplish. But in the meantime, there's also specific plans and purposes for you that are set out for you, right? He knows you since you were the beginning, right? He crafted you in your mother's womb. He knows every hair on your head. Well, what's really interesting about this is we have this ability to choose, and we have this ability to animate, we can animate devices in a certain nature and character. And so when you think about these purposes that you have, well, the practical of walking out our faith is one of, hey, how do you see this? What do you have next? Hold each thought captive. And I think the challenge is, I dealt with this challenge this morning, is that the open ports and those who want to take you out, right, to make you ineffective. And really, the evidence that you're in the game is the fact that there is this kind of pushback and resistance, and that there are things that are trying to. I mean, the things that the spirits will say to you is unbelievable. These things come in, and you think, oh, this is just me. And it's amazing that there's provision now, here on this side in life, that there's provision, but there's consistent, I mean, really consistent evidence from people who have had these experiences that this meat suit isn't you. And of course, I try to go like, oh, well, then what's it all for? Well, one of the things that Jesus said is, store up your treasures in heaven, not where kind of moth and vermin will destroy. And, that's always been a challenge for me. It's like, well, what are the treasures of heaven? And it says, without me, you can do nothing. Well, what do we mean? Well, I can go eat lunch. I have that choice. No, nothing of eternal consequence you can do on your own. And then you think about it. Well, how is my life ordered? Am I ordered to get mine when Lambo? Is it about financial security? Well, a lot of these things are temporary. They're the lie that if you have these things, it will be better, right? And of course, you have to provide, right? You have to survive. You have to feed and clothe yourself. There are basic things. But Jesus even speaks about those things. Look at the birds of the field. Look at these things, these plants, these flowers, all of these things that are provided for. And he says, worrying cannot add a day to your life. What's amazing about this is there seems to be a reward for what you do. And it can be a reward here or it can be a reward there. And there's so much talk of basically doing things in front of people. Your giving, your prayer, your all these things to get your reward in full here, right? To be seen as super spiritual, to be seen as, somebody that, you're puffing yourself up. And what is amazing is it looks like that there is work for us to do. And when we think of eternity, we're like, well, that kind of sounds boring. Wearing a white robe or a diaper on a cloud with a harp, that's not the picture. We talked about the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John go up, and here's Jesus talking to Moses and Elijah. Why is he talking to Moses and Elijah? Because they're alive. And this is why I pulled out this picture of Steve. And so thankful that my buddy Ray, got me this baseball card. And I thought about my dad, and I thought about all those who have gone before me. And I think about God is the God of the living. And so many people have so much fear around this, right? Like, oh no, dying. Because we've been, it's not hard to look around and go, well, kind of stuck in this stimulation, this situation, but it's there for a reason and a purpose. And so, these are just my thoughts on it. I think about the military. I think about, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you became a general. I don't care what you are. You go through basic training, whether you're going to be an officer or enlisted man. And those in the military know this. I don't. But what is amazing is there's basic training. There's this thing called boot camp, and you're going to go. Whatever you end up doing, you're going to go through this. This is the stuff you need to understand in the basics. And so think about this. Somebody that is a good soldier, right? Somebody that knows the rules, knows how things are set up, understands the hierarchy, understands the chain of command, is going to operate within that a certain way. And then there are those who don't. But what's really interesting about this is in the military, if you do something wrong, do they kill you? Like literally put a gun to your head and blow you up? No, you are disciplined, right? You go to the brig, right? There's military police, all of those things. And what's interesting is I back out and I look at this and I'm like, hey, Jesus, how do you see this whole thing? Because all of these people with these near-death experiences say they essentially are faced with this light, with this Jesus, like literally, regardless of their backgrounds and regardless of their religious affiliation or their culture. And what's amazing by that is people said it was not judgmental. It wasn't what you would think of, well, I show up there and there's this judge who's going to drop a hammer on me. What they said was that in the presence of this light and in the presence of this love and this compassion and all of this stuff, I was unworthy. I saw all of this. And many people talk about life reviews that they see, like literally a review of their life. And rather than a condemnation of God, right, this heavy-handed God, it's one of reflection in comparison to the holiness and the beauty of this. And you know what you deserve. And think about the thief on the cross, right? Two guys on the cross. He's like, hey, man, I recognize who you are. Remember me. And he says, today you'll be with me in paradise. All of these people, 1,500 people, all the commonalities basically say it's paradise. Well, what does it mean? There's roles and responsibilities. There's hierarchy. It talks about in scripture how, this one will get 5 cities and 10 cities. And I think about all the ways and all the things that Jesus spoke about and how he taught. And he talked in terms of this idea of you've been given something. How you doing with it? How you dealing with the cards you've been dealt? You think about all these stories that Jesus spoke of. And one of the things we camped out on a lot with Steve was this idea that, he pushes back from the lake and tells everybody an agricultural story. And majority of people just go home. They're like, hey, that was a great story. Jesus, thanks so much. But there was a group of people that chased after him and said, what did you mean by that? They were interested in Jesus' perspective. Hey, why did you tell that story? I kind of understood this about like different soils and different things and what things felt. Well, what did you really mean? Because obviously you were talking in this parable. And you know what he called them? Those people that chased after him? He called them the ecclesia. And that's the term that we use for church. And so what's really interesting is we think the church is a building and a place and the local church. Jesus said, these are the people who are interested. Are you interested? And so what's amazing to me is that God would, in his divine plan, send someone like Steve and go, yeah, I'm called to men of the transfer. And I'm like, and the Lord says to me, listen to him. And I listen to him and he's like, hey, man, are you interested? And every single time, I've said this a million times on this podcast, that he never said, believe me, I have the answer. You know what he said? Why don't you ask him yourself? And I think what has happened in this world, because we've been told that over billions and billions of years, you evolved into this thing, and it's an accident. When the lights go out, it's over. Well, there's all this evidence that says when the lights go out, it ain't over, folks. But there's a purpose to this life. Why would you have choice? Why would you know the difference between good and evil? Why would you have free will? And why would he honor it? If it is not a great filter. And that's how I see it. This is boot camp, folks. This is boot camp for eternity. And the question is, if you're going to be a good soldier, and he's like, hey, without me, you can do nothing. And you have access to him, direct access to him. Well, you could ask him, hey, how do you see this? And what I think is so amazing is without faith, it is impossible to please God, because you first have to, agree that he exists, and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. He rewards those who earnestly seek him. He didn't say, he rewards those who get everything right. No, it's this interest, this seeking. It's impossible to please him. And, well, what is faith? It's this packet, what he called this atomic packet of faith that's given to you. Because if you actually look at the term faith and you understand that faith comes through hearing, it's by listening to the spoken words of Jesus. I'm fine with you saying, well, that's what the Spirit of God does. Great. I'm not going to split hairs with you there. But the fact is, are we interested in understanding and hearing those things? Because we've been convinced that, wow, there's nothing there. There's no speaking. There's no direction. There's no guidance. There's no God. And what this whole thing is about is to understand that I finally had someone come into my life who said, this isn't just about salvation, folks. This isn't just about fire insurance from heaven to get to heaven. No, there's an actual thing here, and that it plays itself out and it has purpose. And so, what is this value? You know, here we are talking about this. You're not on a cross next to Jesus being a criminal and about to die. So you have some time. What is the purpose? What are you doing with your life? And how are you animating the tools? And in what nature and character are you doing those things? And I think what's really amazing is a guy like John Burke is different. A guy like Christian Widener is wired differently. A guy like Steve Staggs is wired differently. A guy like Cadium is gifted in certain ways. And you think about, well, why did he make this body of many parts this way? Why did he give you a personality, and why did he give you experiences? Even look at David. Why did he send a lion and a bear to David? Well, maybe in preparation for Goliath. And when you start thinking of it in those terms, and then you think about Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they're alive conferring with Jesus, that means that Steve, my dad, all of those who went before me are more alive than I am. Think about that for a second. In death, you're more alive. Yeah, because this is we're seeing through this thing dimly. Folks, this is amazing. And the question is, what are you doing? Are you interested in understanding this stuff? Because I don't have the answer. I just have what Steve said, right? I have what the Bible says. Hey, I know the guy. I know a guy. I know a guy that knows it. You know, and so what are we doing? And I think what's amazing about it is the implications of this stretch from your interpersonal relationships with a partner or with a spouse or something. And the question I would have is, do you value others in addition or more valuable than yourself? And I think that that's where this thing really sits, because they asked Jesus, what are the greatest commandments, right? There's like 10 of them. What are the most important ones? And he says, love the Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, something like that. And love your neighbor as yourself. Well, first you have to love yourself. Do you love yourself? And then do you see and consider others in addition to yourself? And in some cases, in love, consider them more valuable. Because I would say this, finding relationships in your life where people mutually consider you more valuable than themselves is difficult. But here's the really crazy catch. You know what the secret to success is? You know, all the success books? Help other people win. That's your job. Well, what does that mean? Consider others in addition to yourself. Consider them more valuable than yourself. And it's so true. You ever go to a party or something, and you're there and you're pretty aware, and you get introduced to somebody, and that person talks for the next like 60 minutes about themselves, drops all kinds of names, is, you know, like you're basically just standing there listening to someone with a soliloquy or something. And of course, you know, we understand what narcissism is. But I witnessed Steve in action. He was one of the most calm and listening people. And if there was ever a situation, you go, are you open to another way of viewing this? He didn't correct people. He didn't go, you're wrong. And I think what's so amazing is that's because he had consideration and compassion for other people. And he understood that the value was in your interest. And he wasn't going to stand in the way of that. He was going to say, hey, you opened a new way of thinking about this. Not a new theology, but a new perspective. And I think what's so beautiful about this is, at the very, very core of this is, we've been taught, I think, to be judgmental and to correct people and to be in a situation where we're judging things. And it looks like the value is actually in how we care and how we extend grace to other people, how we love them. And there's difficult situations all over the place, but I think this is one of the greatest things that I take away. And then in light of like a whole different perspective of like, hey, look at all these people that, you know, we brought back, and the transformation on these people's lives is crazy because it's really difficult because they don't want to come back. Well, it gives you a promise of what's to come, but it also suggests there's a responsibility here. You do have the ability to store up treasures in heaven. You really do. What you do matters. And to think about this, what do we want? You know, we've got a leader in the pulse chain. His name's Richard Hart. And what does Richard Hart do? Well, Richard Hart's a pretty arrogant person, pretty confident, very smart. I don't think he acknowledges the presence of Jesus, even though he was raised, I think, within a church that proclaimed him. But what's amazing about him is there's something deep inside of him that is an advocate. And I'm always drawn to that. It's like, I dismiss a lot of people who are just, you know, narcissistic and all about themselves, the people that won't shut up. But then I see Richard and I'm like, I pay attention. I'm like, hold on, there's something there that's built in, which is an advocacy. And then when you see all this stuff and you back out from it, you go, whether or not he acknowledges the fact, he's actually concerned about the future and about you. Now, does he want that glory for himself? Possibly. But what's the net effect of it? When you have as much money as he does, I guarantee you, you and I would probably disappear. Why would I help these people? I got mine. Well, he got his long ago and he's still going. And so when you listen to him and you're like belly aching about the charts, you look at things and you go, why would this guy be going to such, expense to not just fight a fraud charge with the SEC, but to set a precedent on whether your writing to the blockchain is speech? Because it connects your actions to an inalienable right that does not come from the state, but comes from the creator. We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And it's really fascinating as we see the America falling apart, the West falling apart. We see these things happening as we've gotten away from this concept that our rights don't come from the state, that we don't come under, the authority of the Constitution. No, we recognize that we created it. Why? Because we wanted to create a more perfect union. We didn't create a democracy. We created a representative republic. And we know that all of these things, the three-letter agencies and all this stuff, have gotten to this point where it's become driven by selfish ambition. And what is that driven ultimately by? The convincing of people that this is as best as it's going to get, that there's no purpose in this, that you are the descendant of a monkey, that you crawled out of the ooze, and over billions of years this happened. But if you listen to that John Burke thing and you listen to these people of all cultural backgrounds, so this isn't like, oh, it's just a bunch of Baptists who had this experience. No, this is like people who had no context of what Christianity was. And they came to face with the author and the perfecter of it all, who has all authority, that all things are created for him and by him. And when you see that, you're like, this is amazing. And we're getting a glimpse into that. And I feel like we're coming into an era where all of these things are being exposed. I was like, why did this happen? Why am I 50 when I understand this stuff? Why did I go to a meetup in Texas and meet a guy named Steve Staggs? Well, there's obviously a plan and there's a purpose. Because if you think about the hardships that you're going through, the hardship that I went through this morning, it's a lion, it's a bear. Consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kinds. It builds endurance in you. And you never know what it's preparing you for. But you want to be the church, if you're somebody that's convinced that that's valuable, well, what did Jesus call the church? Those who chased after him and were interested in what he meant. And he called them the ecclesia. And I think that's just so fascinating. This idea of, well, what is the mandate? Well, it's all captured in the way in which Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Right? You are holy. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There's a picture of what this is supposed to look like, and it don't look like it. Well, why did the guy go into the bowling alley and kill 18 people? And what did Steve say? He's like, Matt, devices are neutral. The things that change the world aren't new technology. They're not things. They're a nature and a character. And when we think about leadership and why leadership is so important, and we think of leaders as, well, those are like, national leaders. No, that's you in your home. That's you in your friendships. That's you in these things. The question is, are you willing to stop a minute and consider others more valuable than yourself? That's called love, by the way. And really, what are we doing? We're spurring each other on to love and good deeds. Well, what is that a reflection of? Are you interested? Well, are you interested in what Jesus' perspective? Are you interested in how God sees this? And then are you interested in others and how they're actually doing? When was the last time you actually had a real friend say to you, "Are you okay? How you doing?" And actually was interested, not just like some like, "Well, hey, how you doing today?" No, no. Those are like some of the most valuable people ever. And if you're not about around a group of people who are breathing life into you and value you, like run the other direction. Literally jettison those people out of your life. It's way too short for you to go around with people basically beating you down. I saw a bumper sticker one time. It said, "Those who have abandoned their own dreams will discourage yours. Those who have abandoned their own dreams will discourage yours." Oh my goodness, how true that is. Whether you're, I mean, how many of you out there had parents who were critical of you all the time, didn't believe in you, right? You know, were just highly critical. Besides abuse and the things that happened there, I have a lot of compassion and feel sorry for a lot of people who have created that environment with people. But what's amazing is what we're learning is, I mean, you want to get into a rabbit hole of rabbit holes. The very nature of intent literally is broadcast. There's some not funny, but some interesting research around people who human emotions and plants, living systems, right? Like literally our emotional has impact on the growth and development of things. And then of course you look at child development. We fostered kids. And one of the big things that they talked about was the research that was on brain development for babies. And a lot of the children that end up in the foster care system have been abused, not by physical abuse by breaking their legs. No, they've been abused because they haven't had that connection at the very beginning that drives brain development. And it's really interesting. You're like, hold on, when you hold a baby and a mother holds a baby and looks into its eyes, so why is it important that we have the family? These provisions are here. This system that's been created is abundant. And so what is the battle? Folks, the battle is not between flesh and blood. And when you start seeing things that way, you realize, okay, am I going to be a net positive or going to be a drag on this system? Steve, my buddy Steve, was not a drag on the system. He gave. And what is that? That's love. And, I hope that the legacy of these, podcasts that Steve did, and we right side up, is an encouragement to you to seek after the creator of the entire thing and ask him how he sees things. And when you're facing troubles of many kinds, understand that, try to consider it pure joy. Because for me this morning, it was not very easy to do. But through your prayers and through literally saying out loud, only Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me. And Satan, you have no standing here. It's tremendous. Folks, thanks for joining the Pulse today. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and it's Stephen Friday. This is Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs. Have a great weekend, and don't mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.